please, over to you.
We'd be happy to. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Can I now share my screen, please?
Yes, you can. Please, you can share your screen.
Okay, I hope this one is visible. Um, okay, so hi everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the part of the world. Myself, Dr. Rucha Joshi. I'm an assistant professor of education at Plaksha University in Mohali, Punjab state of India, northern India. And I just moved to India about 3 months ago. I was an assistant professor at University of California, Davis before moving here. I'm just excited to be in this part of the world. And today I'm joined by my colleague, my research fellow, Ridhima Jain. This work was also aided by Dr. Shashank Tamaskar, who is also faculty at Plaksha. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you the motivation for our paper. We all know the SDG 4 of quality education for all, and we all know the importance of sustainable development goals and how much it's critical right now to convince our future generation, prepare them to face these grand challenges of the world. And so we were intrigued by this question of, can we use quality entrepreneurial education goal for sustainable development, first of all, starting at our university campus, then expanding to the city level, and then expanding at national and eventually at global level. Also, another part of motivation here that I'd like to share with you all is this infographic, which shows that most of the scholarly input on the world scholarly output on the sustainable development education and its research comes mostly from high-income countries, and India, the part we are in currently now, coming from more of a developing country zone. We were motivated to bring us into a higher output for in terms of the scholarly education and research on SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And that's also true in terms of translational research. So that was the motivation, because it's a high time to educate our next generation to ensure the sustainability of our campus, of our city, nation, and our most importantly of our unique planet. Now, you might be wondering, where is this entrepreneurial mindset coming in sustainable development education? And the reason for that is that we thought tomorrow's problem solvers, if they are to contribute towards SDGs, there is a valuable contribution by entrepreneurs, most of whom also need to have problem-solving skills that belong to engineering skill set. So we thought that entrepreneurial mindset needs to be built up in our student, and it's not a fixed personality trait, but we were happy to learn that it can be shaped by a classroom environment, and we were inspired to create such a classroom environment. I'd like to reiterate here that entrepreneurial mindset is a bit different from entrepreneurship, which just focuses on inspiring students to start a business venture. Entrepreneurial mindset, on the other hand, is focused on building certain qualities, such as the ones you see in the bullets here, developed by the Kern Entrepreneurial Engineering Network in the US, such as the persistent curiosity of all things, skills to make connections between seemingly unrelated things, and an ever-present goal to create a value in the current landscape. So these three were named as 3 C's of the EM. And although there's no consensus on definition of the EM, we saw these 3 things constantly. Also, the skill to take risks, to behave in a certain manner in unpredicted situations, all of these were also described in the literature. We wanted to prepare our students to have these qualities through entrepreneurial mindset and sustainability design thinking mindset in preparing them towards addressing sustainable development goals. So we also looked at how do others build entrepreneurial mindset or this, how do they bring it into the curriculum? And we found that the major models of the current universities focus on calling entrepreneurship as a major found within the business schools, which are separate from engineering curriculum mostly, leading students to choose between engineering and entrepreneurship as opposed to exploring them together. So students explore extra coursework through this kind of a business school arrangement or university entrepreneurship center activities in their spare time instead of having it as a compulsory obligatory activity that goes hand in hand with their formal education. And we wanted to change that. So we thought about how to involve our stakeholders, including faculty, students, and administrators, in infusing this kind of an entrepreneurial mindset in our curriculum for supporting sustainable development goals education. And we came up with a couple of courses that can have this project-based intervention. Number one being Innovation Lab and Grand Challenges Studio, and the second course being Design Thinking course, where we could start making smaller interventions with these kinds of mindset activities, mindset infusing activities. And then we also are looking at how to measure whether there has been a progress made or not. It's our goal of infusing sustainable development thinking and the entrepreneurial mindset. So at this juncture, I would like to hand over the talk to Ridhima Jain.
Hi everyone, I'm Ridhima, and now I'll go over the specifics of our research that we here are conducting at Plaksha. I hope you can hear me well. As you know, we want to induce different qualities like entrepreneurial mindset and sustainable design thinking in our engineering students. And for that, our first step is to introduce two courses in their first semester of engineering curriculum. One is Innovation Lab and Grand Challenges Studio, also known as ILGC, and the other one is Design Thinking. Now I'll go over some of the learning outcomes that are covered in each course. So as you can see, for ILGC, a big focus is on developing sustainability design thinking. And here, what we do is we first introduce students to various global SDGs that exist so that they are aware about the issues around them. And then we help them implement their own problem solving in the form of mini projects where they identify sustainability issues on their own university campus and utilize a sustainable design thinking cycle to solve them. And other than that, we of course have entrepreneurial mindset as learning outcome, which, as Rucha mentioned, we use the 3 C's of EM to explain that to students. And then we have other outcomes such as teamwork and leadership, metacognition, which is also the students' level to self-reflect on their ILGC journey, and finally communication. For design thinking, on the other hand, the learning outcomes are, some of them are similar, but some of them are also different. Like the focus is more towards applying engineering design skills so that they can develop products that can improve the functionality of the campus. Then we have other things like solving complex problem, working in teams, learning EM from entrepreneurs. In this course, there will also be a guest lecture series where we will invite real life entrepreneurs to teach entrepreneurial mindset to our students. And then we have other outcomes like understanding user needs. So students will do a complete customer needs analysis to understand whether suggested solutions actually create the impact that they should, actually if they meet the intended purpose or the user's needs. So yeah, those are the two courses. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, great. So this is a snippet of some of the ways in which we introduce entrepreneurial mindset. So we start by introducing the 3 C's framework to the student and then provide them tools such as question formulation technique, function junction activity, and the NABC framework, which they utilize in their own projects in ways that they could understand how these tools can be used to apply the 3 C's of EM in their own projects. Next up is going over to the next slide. Thank you. For sustainable design thinking, we cover topics like biomimicry, which is like nature-inspired solutions. And we also introduce this sustainability design thinking cycle by venture well to students that they then utilize to complete their own projects. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for our work in progress study, we are focusing primarily on two variables. One is sustainable design thinking, and the other one is entrepreneurial mindset. Next slide. Now, in order to measure entrepreneurial mindset in a holistic manner, we utilize multiple perspectives. We start by understanding faculty perspective of students' EM by analyzing their performance on EM related assignments. So we analyze students' grade and how they perform in there. Then we also try to understand students' self-perception of their own EM through methods like surveys and student reflections. So here the survey that we have chosen is the ISMA survey, Engineering Student Entrepreneurial Mindset Assessment, which was developed from the 3 C's research and is specifically designed to measure EM in engineering students. It measures traits like altruism, ideation, and risk-taking to understand how students are predisposed to get towards these traits. For ILGC reflections, we give students weekly prompts where they are encouraged to think about ways in which they have applied the 3 C's in different ILGC activities. So in summary, we are covering both the quantitative and the qualitative measurement for EM. Sustainable design thinking is measured in a similar manner where we analyze students' grade on activities that teaches them sustainable design thinking in ILGC. And then we have other variables such as growth mindset and students' level of interest, engagement, and self-efficacy in entrepreneurship to see how these factors influence the entrepreneurial mindset of students and whether there's a relationship between them. For the last 3 variables, we have used survey items from Engineering Entrepreneurship Survey. And then for the growth mindset, we have utilized the DUEX growth mindset scale. We're hoping to learn whether there's any kind of relationship between these variables, sustainable design thinking, and entrepreneurial mindset. Next is, so finally, through this study, we make a novel attempt to induce EM along with sustainable design thinking in engineering students who come from an Eastern education background. And from the study, we hope to learn whether our course-based intervention actually have an impact on their EM levels and sustainable design thinking. We also hope to learn about different factors that might have a relationship with the EM in students. And finally, we would get to know more about how these interventions that we have developed actually improve the EM and if there are ways in which we can maximize the EM growth in students. Going forward, so these are some of the future extension that we see from our research. One is we would like to develop plug-in EM course modules, which can be adapted to different engineering courses. Through this way, we try to give faculty a means to make their courses more entrepreneurial and in turn the whole engineering curriculum more entrepreneurial. Other directions include building an EM assessment tool, which is based specifically on research done in the Eastern engineering education context. And lastly, we want to identify more factors that affect EM so that we could come up with a conceptual model that explains the functioning of EM and how it is influenced by different factors. That's it from our end. Thank you for listening to our presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now.
Thank you so much. Before Michael comes next as the presenter, we want to thank Joshi and Ridhima, I think I get the pronunciation right, for your beautiful presentation. A question for Rusha, Joshi, and Ridhima. If you have questions on their presentation, please, you can please signify, and then we can, before we excuse them on the platform, to have Michael as the next presenter. Okay, question for anyone with question. Let me see if any participant hand is up. Okay, I can see. Let's see. Okay, I have a private question sent on the private chat now, asking that if this part of your presentation, have you done any public, you've done any presentation or publication of your, or part of this, your presentation before? You have
Right.
publication of?
Not yet. This is a work in progress, and the first paper was submitted through this conference. But we are
Okay.
expanding on this network, and eventually would like to disseminate on a larger platform. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I think we don't have any other question here again. We'll give it to you once again. Thank you for the beautiful presentation.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
You muted again. You are muted.
Sorry. Michael, you have the floor now. Sorry, I just got.
I'm assuming you heard me okay that way, meaning you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Can you allow me to share my screen? It'd be better for me to run my own presentation.
Absolutely. You can go ahead, please.
Okay, let me go ahead.
Yep.
All right. My topic is money itself. I'd like to hearken back to the video that you showed of that wonderful speaker at the COP26 who talked about the $25 trillion worth of allocation and money, and how little of it was getting to the areas of need throughout the world. And that I would point out that the world is awash with money, but the areas where we need it the most, are experiencing significant scarcity. So my research ultimately evolved into actually what is money itself and where does it come from, who controls it, et cetera. Because if we can get to an understanding of that, then we can break through the stranglehold of lack of money that is impeding so many elements of our efforts in sustainability and other issues in the world. So let me first start off by giving you a bit about my background, so it has some context of how did I come to what I explored and the conclusions, etc. I am your classic Silicon Valley entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. After Vietnam and college and marriage, I started my first business in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1977. And then subsequently, over the next approximate 31 years, I started and ran more than a half a dozen small businesses in diverse industries. And I'm a little sidebar here that at one point I was working with Hewlett Packard in trying to put together what would have been the first corporate incubator in Silicon Valley. We didn't complete the project, but that gives you a sense of my background and experience. But as a serial entrepreneur, I had a lot of direct experience with the kinds of issues that most small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, struggle with. And SMEs, in my experience, are the economic backbone of local economies everywhere in the world. Yet their most common problem is lack of funding, both in the form of capital and credit. So that contrasts with here in the United States, Wall Street and big businesses, which are owned predominantly by the 1% of the population, they're awash with money, and increasingly so, that big businesses have no difficulty in raising capital or credit, but not so with small businesses. So looking at my experiences in that entrepreneurial space, I decided I wanted to leverage that experience. And in 2008, I launched a small nonprofit think tank focused on local economic development issues, and in particular, the issues related to SMEs and their role in local economies. And I wanted to address their particular needs, and that focused very much on money. Well, in the process, that took me deep into two aspects of money: the capital formation space, if I need to raise money to be able to launch my business or grow my business, et cetera. What are the issues that are involved there? And my research was actually used by the White House to help craft the Jobs Act back in 2012, which was the key legislation that legalized crowdfunding in the United States. I also spent a great deal of time in the public banking space, was one of the experts in this space and advising various governments and others about setting up banks that would be owned by governments or nonprofits, and therefore their constituencies are the general public rather than shareholders. And globally, something like 25 to 40% of all banking is actually fitting in within this public banking space. But the United States has a paucity of that. So we've been trying to advance that. Ultimately, though, those efforts led me in 2017 to look at money itself rather than the institutions and systems that provide money. And in the process, that's when I discovered the financial underpinnings to our current financial ecosystem, and in particular, where money comes from and who controls it. And if you understand that reality, it then becomes self-evident, for one, why we have scarcity in this sea of abundance, and why the 1% are actually increasing and gaining wealth while the rest of us are losing it. So let's start with the key question: where does money come from? Most people are going to guess that it comes from the government, but in reality, they would be wrong. That, believe it or not, that the vast majority of money that is in circulation worldwide, and I don't care whose economy you're talking about, with few exceptions, about 97% of all money that is in circulation actually originates from banks. And obviously banks are predominantly owned by the 1%. And there is a key clue there about this idea of the wealth spread. So the question is, well, how did that come about? How come banks are actually the source of money in our circulation? Turns out that about 300 years ago, bankers got the King of England to let them privatize money creation. As you can see, that the king wanted to fight France. And so the bankers, said, well, if you let us create the money, we'll provide it for you. Once they set that model, that what you find is the majority of other countries around the globe followed suit and granted or chartered their banks to privatize the creation of the money for that country. So that leads to the question, well, how do banks actually create money? Well, it turns out that most people erroneously assume that banks lend money that's on deposit by depositors. In reality, banks actually create deposits when they issue new money with each loan that they issue. And they do so by basically collateralizing your loan documents as an asset on their balance sheet, and then offset it with a brand new liability over in the deposit side. So they actually are creating deposits using your own creditworthiness as the way of creating money. That little ledger domain, the sleight of hand, was revealed by the Bank of England back in 2014. And prior to that, even the majority of the people in the banking industry didn't understand that they actually create money with each new loan. So the question is, how does that create a wealth concentration for the few and the scarcity for the rest of us? Turns out that when banks create the loan, they only create the principal, but not the interest. Yet the borrowers have to pay back more than they borrow. So the question that leads to is, where's that interest come from? And it turns out that the borrowers essentially have to go pull that money somehow, some way out of general circulation, which got established by other loans. So, and if they fail to pay back that principal and the interest, they wind up forfeiting the collateral that they pledged for that loan. So in either case, whether they're pulling interest out of the economy or they're having to sacrifice the collateral that they put up, that translates to that bit by bit, the more and more of the wealth of the 99% is getting transferred to the 1%. So that's really the underlying driver behind the concept of wealth concentration in around the world. So the key question that leads to then is, well, is there any alternative available to us? Because if we're all currently stuck in this paradigm and that we're kind of like fish in water, that we don't even realize we have that water around us, the economic system, which is essentially owned and controlled by the bankers, establishes the have and have nots conditions that we would obviously like to break out of if we want to try and address sustainability issues and so on. And so the key answer to that is, if the bankers can create money out of thin air, so can we. And that is one of the key fundamentals that I discovered, is the idea that we, the people, are capable of issuing our own money. It's something that is now becoming very self-evident to a lot of people because of the high popularity of cryptocurrencies, which is money, private money, that is issued by non-government or non-bank sources. But the key is that cryptocurrencies are actually, latecomers to the game, as I say here, that the idea of alternative currencies, non-national currencies, have actually been around for a very long time. And we can actually trace their existence working alongside national economies as a practice that literally can be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt. And here in the United States, even our Federal Reserve has published several articles affirming that not only can we legally issue our own money, but that concept has frequently been done in the past. And in fact, more often is done during times of economic crisis rather than when there are good times. So if you look then at all these different examples of the use of private money throughout history, what you're going to find is that it's been done thousands of times, typically on a localized basis. What you'll find is lots of times a community will issue its own currency in order to encourage the local citizens to buy from their local businesses in programs called buy local campaigns. The issue there, though, is the vast majority of them produced very limited benefits, for the regions. It's a measurable benefit, but it's not really significant. However, through my research, I discovered that there were various times throughout history where private money actually created widespread prosperity for the general public. I'll give one example in addition to the one I'll give in my next screen, that during the middle of the Great Depression, a small town in Austria, the mayor there decided to hire contractors directly to do work for the city and just simply printed up his own money and paid them. They went from 30+% unemployment to near zero in a matter of weeks, and hundreds of communities across Europe wanted to replicate it till the central bankers came in and outlawed those kinds of currencies. There's an even more dramatic period, which I point out here in this example, that most people are unaware of, that there was about a 250-year period during the central Middle Ages, where there actually was greater prosperity for the general public than even for the most part throughout the world today. And that was very specific dates between 1040 and 1290. And that's when there was over 1,000 cathedrals and 350,000 churches built throughout Western Europe using money, such as Notre Dame was issued or built by the Parisians, issuing their own money. Of course, these large infrastructure projects were often 50 to 100 years long, so they kept issuing money, during that time frame that kept pumping more money into the local economy. And those infrastructure projects were not paid for by government money or church money. So as a result of that, massive infrastructure project, that Western Europe experienced really significant prosperity. And those investments, as it's kind of self-evident, that those cathedrals serve as attractants to tourists, even to this day, 800 years later. So the key question there was, what did these folks do differently than the vast majority of folks that issue their own local currency? And what I determined was that in most cases that the average program issues a currency, a non or private currency, in exchange for the national currency. So they're really just swapping one currency for another. In contrast, like the mayor that was in Austria, or all these communities throughout Europe during that Central Middle Ages, they essentially do what I call spent money into existence. They essentially issued the money directly in exchange for labor, not money, and thereby they continuously injected new money into the local economy. Once we understood that concept, that we were able to take those various elements and build them into an entire economic development system that we call the Sustainable Communities Framework. And you can get the details of that from my white paper that drills into what is money, where's it come from, and then the history of the successful paradigms, and then what we can do about it now. The key here message that I would like to leave with everybody is we are not locked into this assumption that we don't have enough money to solve our problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful presentation. Of course, personally, I will like to hook up later after the program. I'm personally interested in your presentation because that's also part of my research interest. So maybe before the next speaker, Professor Gabriel Martinez is on board now. Before he comes up, I want to entertain questions for Michael Sovent. Please, before Michael leaves the board, is there any question? Anyone? I know it pertains to money and everybody will be okay. Ashi Barua, please, you have the floor. Let me unmute you.
Thank you. Thanks. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, so good evening from Bangladesh. Thank you, Michael. You have made my evening. Okay, it's really a mind-blowing presentation, and the issue you have brought on the table that we usually don't experience that much, right? You have pointed out the root causes of the existing inequality in the society globally in each countries. So yeah, it's really brilliant. I would be interested in having the full paper if you can share, please. And yes, yeah, you have raised really good few questions that's really important. So, for example, we know about the cooperatives, even in Bangladesh and other places, but which is not that much supported by the state. I mean, in the existing unjust system, the power of people you referred, it actually hardly can work, right? For example, we also know about the Brixton pound, the alternative money, people's money, but how much it is facilitated or supported by the power holders, that's the question. How to challenge the power, right? who controls? As you mentioned, 1% people are controlling the 99%. We know that most of the resources are around 16 palms in the world. So thank you, Michael, for bringing this on the table. I would love to read your full paper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just put the link into, you can get to the full paper by the first link, and then my presentation is the second link. If I may, there's one thing that I didn't emphasize and I want to emphasize is that the essence of our program is something that is doable region by region. It doesn't require, say, an entire country to have to adopt it. You literally can just take a localized region and apply these principles and lift it up. Then in fact, the majority of the experiences throughout history were localized regional things. So it's a bottom up solution set rather than a top down.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Got it.
Gabriel, did you have something?
Thank you so much. Thank you
Gabriel,
so
did you have
much,
something you wanted to ask?
Michael. I hope we don't have question for Michael any longer.
We have question.
I want to hand over the floor to. Okay, question. Okay, sorry, Michael.
Yes.
Someone has question for you.
So I want to thank Michael for that beautiful presentation. But from what you have said, Michael, when people create their own money, that means it benefits the majority of people, just like what cryptocurrency is doing now. And you rightly said in the example of Austria that you gave, that after some time, the authorities moved in and stopped it. So why do authorities or powers, why do they always come in to stop such movements to print money or bring in money that will help reduce the problem on people?
Well,
why do authorities do that?
Yeah, well, they did do that mostly back in the 1900s and before. And in fact, that's what stopped the effort within Europe. And 2 generations later, 60 years later, is when, you know, they had the Dark Ages and the Black Death and so on. That once they stopped issuing their own money, which was just by, as you're pointing out, was done by the governments, that they decided they wanted to take back control. And then especially back in like in the 1900s, that happened. But I would point out now the proverbial toothpaste is out of the toothpaste tube, and that the explosion of cryptocurrencies. Last I heard, there was like 10,000 different currencies out there, and the vast majority of them are the playground of the wealthy. And that's the key that I think gets to what you're trying to address here, that usually they do this suppression when it's a threat to them. Well, now they've actually gotten a system going where they're benefiting, and that they will not be able to stop the proliferation of all kinds of different currencies, whether crypto or otherwise, simply because that they would then cut themselves off at their own knees. So now it's kind of an economic judo concept to our benefit, that I think that gate has been opened and cannot be closed again.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes. Gabriel, were you trying to say
Sorry,
something?
please, if you have any question, kindly private chat Michael. We run out of time now. Professor Gabriel Martinez, please, you have the floor. One of our key speakers has just joined. So please, we will. I want after Gabriel, Sir Vijayendra Rao will be speaking. So please, Gabriel, you have the floor, because we have to wait and engage others because of your time. And so thank you. We'll do that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. First, I will ask, are you listening well to me?
We hear you.
We can hear you.
Please.
You can hear. Okay.
Hear you.
Well, I'm sorry if I had a little mishap with the scheduling, with change of time, but I'm here with you. Well, I want to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation to talk at this meeting. I think we are living times of decision, and we need to find tools to solve the common problems we have around the world. I'm going to be talking about an issue that I believe is one of the most important for mankind now. It's related to something that is happening that is really changing our societies. It's not new, it's aging. It has been running for quite some time. And the perspectives are very optimistic. We're going to keep improving health and nutritional status. However, there is a large degree of inequality in the world, and that affects the prospects of that progress in health. So what I'm going to show you is a measurement of the differences across countries in the valuation of longevity. And I believe there are two clear implications for this. One is that this tells us something about how investments and expenditures in health could be improved. And the second issue that I believe comes about is that the very large differences in the valuation of longevity across countries mean that some countries are just not that interested in investing in global solutions. And that has to do with, you know, we just had this big meeting on climate change, and people say, well, you know, everyone has to chip in and contribute. However, it's clear that the gains from reducing climate change are very different across countries, and we have to understand why. And well, I'd like to see my computer is a little bit stuck with Zoom. I don't know why. So I want to show you 2 or 3 graphs I have, but I'm not being able to do it. But well, anyway, I'm going to tell you about what I have and the consequences of that. Well, the first thing to understand is that what I have is an economic and econometric calculation of the value of longevity. Economists have this concept called the value of a statistical life. And the value of statistical life basically measures the willingness to pay for improvements in health, for decreases in mortality. Okay, economists do not really measure the value of life. Okay, that's not what we do. But what we do is to say, how much is people willing to pay to live a little bit longer? Okay, that's what we do. And to do that, what I did is to set up a database of all the countries in the world and make systematic calculations of the value of longevity. These calculations, this type of calculations are used across the board. Many developed countries use them for regulatory purposes, say to evaluate new standards on clean air, on workplace safety, on consumer product safety, and so on. That's used extensively by countries. And I'm sorry. Okay, I'm connected with the phone and the computer because I'm having some issues with the computer. I don't know why, but
okay. Sorry, Gabriel. Maybe you can help us summarize. You send us the copy, then we can send the copies to everyone. So that I'll just summarize. Sorry that Sarah.
I'm going to do that.
Okay.
So let me tell you just briefly then about the data are important because if we don't have information to deal with problems, we have a limitation. For this research, we need information on health, on mortality, and we need some labor information on earnings, work, leisure, and finally, we need information on consumption by age. Now, information on health is provided by the GBD database. This is a database managed by the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington. It's a very rich database. It has been of tremendous use for research. On labor, we have data from the ILO, and here we begin to face limitations because not many countries have information on hours worked by age. Most countries have information on labor force participation. Most countries have information on earnings, but the quality of the information perhaps not as high as it could be. And finally, data and consumption is very hard to come by. Countries usually do not produce this. They produce data and consumption by households, which is not the same as consumption by individuals. And what I did was to put this together. There's a project called the National Transfer Accounts. They have calculations on consumption by age for several countries. And with that, I did some econometrics. I'm not going to get into the detail. The paper is going to be published, and I can send you all the information if you're interested in this. But basically, we produce data on these variables: consumption, leisure, work, earnings, for essentially all countries in the world. And that allows us to make calculations for each country. In the past, what researchers have done, for example, the World Health Organization has paid research on these, the World Bank has paid research on these. What they do is that they take calculations for rich countries, typically the US, and then they make some assumptions to make calculations for less developed countries. And what I'm doing is to make calculations from the bottom up. Okay, and there are some interesting results. Basically, because we're not going to get into the technical issues, but the basic.
Sorry, Gabriel. You may wish to help us summarize because we have waited for your time, and we are eating deep into Sir Vijay Rao's time now, and he is saying that he wants to leave in 15 minutes time. So please, we would like to have the paper, and I will send it out to every participant on this platform. Please, thank you.
Okay, well, so let me then go to the results. We make the calculations, and we get to this result, which is the remaining value of statistical life. I have all the countries in the database, but here I only put 4 to make an illustration. The United States, France, Colombia, which is a middle-income country, and Ethiopia, which is a low-income country. Differences are huge. And that means that the willingness to pay for improvements in longevity is very different across countries. Okay, I have here the table. You can see countries with the highest values are countries with high income and high longevity, like Singapore, $145,000, United States, 93, okay, China, 35, Nigeria is around here, 28, not that far from Brazil, 39, okay? And I'd like I'm not going to get into the detail, but I'm going to go to the conclusions. The first conclusion is that the difference between the willingness to pay, the value of longevity, whatever name we want to give it, it's not as big as it was believed to be. Okay, with these calculations, we see that the difference between wealthier and less wealthy countries is not as big. Second, this framework can be used to calculate improvements due to specific causes. So we can use this model to calculate, for example, how much is we're willing to pay for a decrease in some type of cancer or type 2 diabetes. We can do that. Then I made a back of the envelope calculations with COVID because, well, we still don't have that much information. But looking at the mortality rates induced by COVID, how much is the population willing to pay to eliminate the risk of COVID? And with these calculations, for example, a rich country like Japan, the population would pay $1,100. That's per person. That's a lot of money. Multiply 1,100. I think Japan's got to be like 120, 130 million people. A middle income country like Colombia, 550. Cambodia, 102. So we have really the evidence is that people is willing to pay significant amounts of money to improve health. However, there's one thing that we have to consider. These are all the calculations of how much is people willing to pay, but there are at least two major issues to solve this. One, there's a challenge in collecting revenues to supply public goods, and we see that all the time. Okay.
Thank you.
And finally, the fact that people is willing to pay does not mean that we have availability of the solutions, and we have to do research for that. Okay. And well, thank you very much for.
Thank you so much, good brother. We have to rush one of our keynote key speaker, Sir Vijayendra Rao is here, and we've eaten deep into his time. Sarah, we are absolutely sorry for taking a long into your time. Please, you have the floor now. Over to you, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to this conference. I'm afraid I have to leave in about 10 minutes or so, so I will do what I can within that time to say what I have to say. And I do want to have a conversation with people. So what I'll do is I'll speak for 5 minutes and we'll have a conversation for 5 minutes. Maybe we can just squeeze it within that framework. Yeah. So the point I want to make is very simple. We are all concerned with climate change. Several of the speakers have spoken about that already, and that's what the Green Institute is primarily about. And climate change has solutions at different levels, at the hyper-local level, within your own neighborhood, within your street. Then we can go to maybe your ward, maybe then go to your city, then maybe go to your state, then maybe go to your country, and then of course global. And as citizens, all of those levels require us to act collectively, to work in concert to achieve, to find solutions. It's a challenge. It's probably the most profound challenge of collective action that we face in this current moment in history across the world, because we all have to keep everybody else's interests at heart, perhaps in some ways even more than we keep our own. The problem is that the institutions we have built for collective action, what are those institutions? Democracy, electoral democracy. Most of us, most people in this audience belong to electoral democracies. And as we know, and this is not true of any one country, it's true of all countries with electoral democracy. Electoral democracy is under threat. It is not working like it should. There have been several brilliant people who have written about why, but one can attribute it to reasons like the role of social media, to the manipulation of votes, to corruption, to all kinds of things. Yeah, but we know it's not working. So we have to find other ways of acting collectively, because this method that we developed in the 18th century and then went across the world of electing a representative who represents our interests, and then within the institutional structure of a legislative body makes decisions that are true for everybody legitimately. That system is under some challenges. Yeah. So what are the alternatives? How do we strengthen these institutions in order to deal with climate change? If we don't solve the problem of collective action, we cannot solve the problem of climate change. Yeah. So what are those ways? And one of the primary problems with electoral democracy right now is the fact that it seems to serve the interests of the rich rather than the poor and the excluded. Yeah. And that's again true in most countries in the world, even in the US. Yeah. So how do we solve this? Now, I come back to the point I made that solutions to climate change start from the hyperlocal to the city, to the state, and so on and upwards. At every level, citizens have to learn how to help themselves in connection, in concert with governments, not in resistance to governments, but to do what Elinor Ostrom called, Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom called co-production, yeah? Which requires us to make decisions using conversation, using discussion. Remember, there were two ways that the ancient Greeks dealt with democracy. One was electoral democracy, where we voted for a representative. The other one is a deliberative democracy, where we get together as a community and solve problems together. Yeah. So what's happening with all of this is that community-based solutions that require people to get together and solve problems together that affect them directly, particularly the hyperlocal level, are becoming more salient, are becoming more necessary. Ideally, they should be integrated with the electoral system, right? So we're able to make decisions as citizens, take them to our representatives. The representatives then act on them in conversation with citizens. That happens in some countries. But if not, we have to find where there's a dirty river in our neighborhood, a little stream. Let's clean it up. How do we make these things happen? Yeah. So this is what I think I've been working on along with several others for many years now. How do we find solutions to such problems? And how do we co-produce solutions to such problems? And this is where the challenge of voice and agency becomes central. How do we make sure that our interests are heard? How do we make sure that we collaborate? How do we make sure that we cooperate with others? The biggest challenge there is to get along with people, to work with people who are different from you. That is a problem faced all over the world right now. We are finding it increasingly difficult to work with people who have different political views, different races, different ethnicities, different religions, different genders. Those challenges make climate change more difficult to solve. These boundaries that we create as human beings that we're unable to cross, unable to collaborate across, make the solutions to climate change more difficult. So this notion then of finding deliberative ways of finding solutions, where we get together as people, as communities, and find solutions collectively, working with people very different from ourselves, is one of the key answers, one of the key institutional challenges we have. Now, the good news is that it is possible. And there are efforts all over the world, including in Nigeria. I'm not that familiar with Nigeria, but I'm more familiar with other parts of the world. But so let me give you examples from there. And I would love to hear from you if you have time of what you're doing in Nigeria and other parts of the world. Let's start with Tanzania, Twaweza and Data Zetu, where they are working with creating community-based data solutions. They give citizens the ability to collect their own data on various issues related to their community action, and they use that data to make better collective decisions. Yeah, and that is in some ways parallel to the government. But in a country like India, where I'm from, there is a constitutional amendment where every village in India has the ability to get together. Every citizen has the ability to get together in a village meeting about every 2 or 3 months to discuss common problems, find common solutions. And that institution, which is called a village meeting, or in the Indian languages, it's called a Gram Sabha, that is constitutionally sanctioned. It has authorities according to the Indian Constitution. Yeah, so that gives it the power to make those decisions in a legitimate way, which has had some remarkable effects. I've written about that in some work, which I'm happy to share if you're interested. Yeah, Malaysia. There's a wonderful organization in Malaysia called Think City, which in the city of Penang worked towards creating Penang, for those of you who don't know, is one of the oldest cities in Malaysia. It's the place where for literally 2,000 years, people would come to that port and enter Malaysia from across the world. It's a trading town. Yeah, they turned all the old buildings, all the old communities by giving loans to homeowners, by creating opportunities for shopkeepers, by creating opportunities for restaurant owners, for street vendors, street food hawkers. And they created this wonderful ecosystem, which at the end ended up with such success that it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site about 10 years ago. Yeah, and now they're doing that in Kuala Lumpur and other parts of Malaysia. So these are community-based solutions that are working with governments to deal with the challenges of collective action. Yeah, that is what needs to happen with finding solutions to climate change, because all of this at the end has an effect on climate change. Take Think City in Malaysia, for instance. They have worked with the government in the city of Penang to create very high walls to prevent the sea from coming in and overtaking the city, to prevent flooding via this community-based process. Yeah. Similarly, in many parts of India, on the east coast of India, which is subject to very, very severe hurricanes on a regular basis, community-based solutions have resulted in two things: creating physical barriers and physical places of shelter during periods of hurricanes, but also coming together with women's groups to rebuild after a major hurricane event has happened. And there's a lot of evidence on this. So there are solutions, but they require us as citizens to give of ourselves in such a way that we see ourselves as a part of common humanity, that there is no difference between me being a Hindu from India and somebody else being a Christian from Nigeria or whatever else. We get together regardless of who we are or what our identity is, because we face a much bigger challenge than the narrow divides that we create to make one human being argue and fight for no rational reason with another. Yeah. How do we create those community-based solutions? How do we create institutions for collective action? Requires us to work across, from the rich and the poor, from across ethnicities, across genders, as I said, to create common solutions. Yeah. Let me stop there. I have to unfortunately leave soon, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
In fact, so we are so blessed and highly inspired to listen to your short speech, even though we would have loved to have that much. Someone just asked Michael, sent a question. Please read what Michael's put on the general chat.
Right, Michael's from the US. So let me give you an example. I live in Washington, DC. So Michael's question is, you can see in the chat, is the US is so entrenched in its national and state constitutions that I have difficulty seeing how we could adopt what you offer. As much as I love it, your thoughts. So Michael, I'm not saying that we should go against national constitutions or against what we already have, but to strengthen them via community-based solutions. Let me give you an example. I live in Washington, DC. I've lived here for 23 years. We used to have a mayor, Anthony Williams. And what Mr. Williams did was that, he was elected, DC was at that time directly under control of Congress for a variety of reasons, and then it started having an elected mayor. And what Mr. Williams, who was the first elected mayor after that period, what he did was that he was elected on a very tiny majority vote in the first election. So in his first term, he went to all the various wards that didn't vote for him and got them to have regular community meetings. Yeah. And I attended them, and these were folks coming from across the economic spectrum, coming together and deciding what they needed for their communities. And they would then go to Mayor Williams and his representatives, tell them what their issues were, and Mayor Williams would then act on that to the extent that he could. And consequently, in the second election that he ran, he won with an overwhelming majority. Yeah. So politicians will actually benefit from this process. It's DC, as for those of you who may not know, Washington DC is a very segregated city. You have the black areas and the white areas. Yeah, Mayor Williams was of African American descent, but was largely elected by white citizens. Yeah, so he reached out to the black community. Yeah, and created this amazing collective spirit in the city, which said we have to rebuild the city, and the city became wonderful for the 20 years after that. It's now coming back to some other problems and so on, but so it is possible to work within that constitution. So in fact, one should. Yeah. Let me give you another
There is
example.
A question. There is a question. There is a question. Can UN come up with?
Yes. So, the question is, can the UN come up with this idea of community-based solutions across the globe disregarding a national divide? So, a very good question. Let me tell you something I've just been involved with. COP26 is going on, as you know, in Glasgow. Yeah. A bunch of young people, many of them Africa-based, in Ghana, got together with people in the UK, with people in India, with people in countries like Mongolia, and created what is called a global assembly. And what happened at that global assembly it's been going on for the last 3 months, by the way. I'm pretty sure it also happened in Nigeria. They created 100 community groups in 100 countries, which got together to understand what challenges they face with climate change, and consolidated those petitions into a prospectus that was offered in COP26 on November 2nd. Yeah, so endorsed by the UN Secretary General, endorsed by all kinds of, the Scottish Prime Minister came to hear them speak. Yeah, and this is just the beginning. They're planning to do this now every year. And increase the scope of this thing. It's a global assembly of citizens, folks. Yeah, endorsed by the UN. It's the beginning, but these solutions are coming that get common people like you and me involved in that process. As young people, that's what we need to do. Our generation and our ancestors, our forefathers, left you a horrible legacy. Unfortunately, it's left to you to solve that problem for future generations. And the only way of doing that is to stop fighting with one another, yeah, and to get together and find those solutions for ourselves in collaboration with governments. You cannot do it against governments, because without governments, you will not find solutions for most things. You can find solutions for some things. You can clean up your streets. You can perhaps, help folks who are in need in your communities. But if you want to find solve problems of infrastructure, we want to solve problems of dealing with, this like the Maldives is going under the sea. You cannot do that on your own. You need government support, and you need the support of international organizations. Okay.
Thank you so much. We are very, very grateful, and we are so honored to have you. Oh, Ashir Barau is having a question. Please be brief, because Professor Rao will be leaving in a short while. Okay, Ashir, yep. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. I will be very, very brief. Actually, he says that we can, but I would like to echo that not only we can, but we should and we must. As he refers about the climate changes, we understand that time of negligence is completely up, right? If we look into the global scenario, it is understandable that we cannot control the climate change, right, within the borders and its impacts. So it sounds like me the time now to shatter the coarse and bold line, as Rao said, between the poor and rich, black and white, developed and underdeveloped, or OECD and LDCs. So to me, the starting point is with a positive notion that as we are talking about that electoral democracy and institutions, so we definitely can change our institutions and systems if we can change ourselves. So as he rightly mentioned about the actions from the youth groups, I also understand and echo that the actions should be started with us, and not definitely, as he said, that not challenging the government, but definitely we can hold government accountable for their commitment. And if we refer the climate change again, looking into the global commitment agreement, see, it's enough is enough. There are lots of commitment, but the global power is not accountable to their commitment. So it's time to start with us to raise our voice, that be accountable, including the government. If we can start with ourselves, then definitely we can do it. Thank you, Mr. Rao, again.
Thanks very much, Ashish. I think I obviously completely agree with you. Thanks very much to the Green Institute for inviting me, and I hope to continue the engagement. And I wish you all the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. We are very grateful. Okay, we are moving to the next program, but I'll just have someone the other time sent a question to Gabriel Martinez. Somebody sent a question privately and sent as a private chat to Gabriel Martinez that what has his research, maybe he should share with us some of his research publications